from Talking Films Online, TFO for short. TFO was founded almost on a whim by Professor Nikhila and myself in June 2020 during the lockdown. It is a group of film scholars, researchers, students, teachers, and anyone passionate about cinema. We are happy that we have been able to sustain this forum thanks to people like you who log in every Saturday to participate in the discussions. It has been our practice to invite people to select and lead the discussion of the chosen film, which we watch in our own time and space. We have also held film festivals such as East European, Iranian, Women's Cinema, and others. We have also held retrospectives of Kelly Reichardt and Adur Gopalakrishnan. In the month of June each year, to celebrate our anniversary, we hold a smartphone short film making contest for students and also organize a lecture series in collaboration with colleges and university departments. This evening's discussion will be led by Dhurjjati Sarma. Dhurjjati Sarma is an assistant professor in the Department of Modern Indian Languages and Literary Studies at Guwahati University, Assam. He was earlier a production editor at Sage Publications, New Delhi, and before that, a research fellow in Northeast India Studies at the Indira Gandhi National Center for the Arts, New Delhi. He is presently engaged in studying the early and modern literatures of Assamese, Bangla, Hindi, and Urdu from a comparative cultural perspective. As a student and teacher of comparative literature, he is also trying to develop new insights and perspectives on the composite areas of contemporary literary history. His writings have been published by Sahitya Academy, Routledge, and Palgrave Macmillan, and in journals like English Forum, Roopkatha Journal, and others. Welcome to you, Dhurjjati, and over to you.
Thank you, ma'am. Yeah. Thank you, Geeta, ma'am, and everyone here at Talking Films Online, Nikhila, ma'am, Parkeshwar sir, and everyone here. Am I audible to all of you? Can you hear me, everyone?
Yes, you are audible.
Yeah. So if in case there's some disruption, just let me know.
Sure.
Right. So thank you, everyone, for inviting me. It's a matter of pleasure being here and discussing about cinema, about forest ecology, about certain topics which, though I'm not a scholar on those areas, but have been trying to engage with some of the concerns which I'll be sharing with you in the course of a very brief introduction to this particular film that we are talking about. Maybe I'll talk for 25 to 30 minutes and then we can have a discussion. So at the very outset, let me confess that I'm not a film studies scholar, so I may not have the technical expertise of terms and terminologies vis-a-vis film studies, but as a student of literature, I will try to put forward my points, and I also like to take this opportunity to also as a learning experience. So the film that I want to initiate today, put forward for a discussion today, is a film, an Assamese film known. It's called Bonani. Bonani basically translates as forest or something to do with forest. And it's an Assamese language film and directed by Jahnu Barua. And Jahnu Barua is a well-known name in the national as well as international circuit. And he has been in the Assamese film scenario for almost close to 40 years. And most of his films have been awarded national and international film awards, been presented with such awards. And he has been making films on various issues, not only issues pertaining to history, politics, society, culture, but also with the nature, human nature interface. So this particular film, which was released in 1989, though this is not generally considered as one of his best known cinema, because there are some of the other movies like Agorole Bohudur, then Halodia Sorai Baudhanka. I guess there was an earlier session on Halodia Sorai Baudhanka, the movie which came out in 1987. And it translates into catastrophe. I mean, it's not the literal translation, but the English translation given to it is catastrophe. Then another movie is Hagorole Bohudur, which is A Long Way to the Sea, which came out in 1995. One of his recent movies is Bhoga Khiriki, which came out in 2018. But the film that I plan to discuss today came out in the year 1989, well, while I was watching the movie, I was just trying to figure out in what way we can discuss this particular movie and talk about it, because this particular session is about talking films online. So even I was sort of jokingly, I had remarked, I had stated that I'll be talking throughout this session, but talking and cinema is primarily about watching. So the very act of talking cinema is a kind of an intermediate exercise, because we are actually talking about something which is generally watched, which is generally, people watch a movie. But when we talk, there are certain other dynamics which come into it. It's not just viewing, but it's also about articulating what the particular film is displaying, what the particular film is showing. So while talking about this particular film, I am planning to do that from two perspectives. One is the concept of Anthropocene, and though this is not a presentation, but I just want to put forward two ways, maybe two perspectives. One is the perspective of Anthropocene, and the other one is a very popular genre of, the upcoming genre called eco cinema. So Anthropocene, we know what is meant by Anthropocene. Is basically, it refers to that the geological appellation, which signifies human control over nature. How it talks about human influence on the earth, and how human induced changes have brought about transformations in the environment, into the earth, which are not merely biological and ecological, but also cultural, political, and social. So with that, eco-cinema tries to expose, or eco-cinema tries to put into focus the effects of the Anthropocene era. So that's how these are somewhat twin categories, the Anthropocene and the eco-cinema. And it basically highlights the negative effects of Anthropocene. And by extension, it also brings forth certain meditations on certain metaphysical concepts, or other philosophical concepts, about the relation between the self and the meta, the self and the consciousness, the internal consciousness and the phenomenological consciousness. So these are some of the concerns which straddle both the domains of the Anthropocene and the eco-cinema. And now we are talking about how films, now cinema as an art form, and cinema as a creative, critical industry. The question that we can grapple it at the very outset, before we actually get into this movie, is how can we envision cinema as an art form and also as an industry? I'm here using the word industry in a very thoughtful way, as an industry, and its impact vis-a-vis the environment. This is one thing that we can discuss, we can talk about. And also, this is an art form. So when we are talking about an art form, we are also talking about a sense of aestheticization And along with this concept of aestheticization, we are also talking about a kind of a human agency, a sense of human intervention. So it begs the question, how is cinema an effective medium to articulate the possible, positive or negative effects of Anthropocene, or rather the human impact of nature, by itself being a category of human invention itself, in an art form which is manufactured by human beings, by the forces of culture and civilization across decades, if not centuries. So can we consider also the cinema also as one of the agencies of Anthropocene? I want to raise this question. And if we consider cinema as an agency of Anthropocene, in that context, how do eco-cinema contribute towards kind of critiquing this very impact on nature of human agency or human interventions into nature? So very briefly, I'm sort of putting forward this perspective. We can discuss this vis-a-vis this movie that we are going to talk about. Now, I'm sure all of you have gone, at least most of you have watched the movie. It's not so you are all acquainted with the story. You are acquainted with the narrative. So I did not summarize what is shown in the movie, but just to put it very briefly, the movie actually recounts the story of a forest range officer called Topon Borua. He is transferred into a Torajuli forest reserve, and where he comes into kind of loggerheads, he encounters a smuggler called Mohesh Chaudhary, who is an illegal timber merchant. He's a smuggler. And so what we see in this movie, in the very first scene, is that we see a very unbridled felling of trees. That's how the film begins. So it begins with a stride. The first shot is how a tree is felled, and then the opening song actually talks about how cinema, or how nature, how trees are the basic foundation. How they have enabled the sustenance of human civilization across centuries, across millennia. So the contrasting picture, the very anthropocentric dilemma, or the anthropocentric predicament that I'm talking about, that is shown in the very opening scenes of the movie. We see both the things happening simultaneously. And even the movie ends on a similar note. And I'll come to that. Even the movie ends on a similar note. So what it shows, there's a kind of a simultaneity which is happening, and that simultaneity has been normalized to such an extent that we are actually unable to make sense that this is proper, this is not proper, this is going against the nature. So this also is a kind of indictment of our civilizational behavior, which has normalized certain activities which we consider, there's a term that we use, unnatural. This term has come to mean different things now, but the very terms unnatural, if we try going deeper into the mechanics of this term, are very unnatural. So the problem is how we have normalized this unnaturalness, and this is exposed at the very opening shots of this particular movie. And then the narrative starts, and at the beginning of the narrative we see how two villagers, how they have ventured into the interiors of the forest to collect a few medicinal herbs to treat hysteria of somebody's daughter is unwell. So and then the next scenes we see those villagers offering the ovations to the forest. So it begs the question that at the very open, the first few scenes of the movie, what we see, there are the communities which are dependent upon this, upon the forest resources. On the one hand, we see the timber merchant, we see the corrupt forest officers who are, who are appointed in the forest reserve, but they are actually, doing their best to make use of the forest resources for their own benefits. But at the same time, we see the communities, the tribal community, the indigenous communities, for whom it's like, their whole livelihood is dependent upon the forest. If we examine the character of Gauri, we will see she talks about how she grew up in the midst of the forest. For her, she is not afraid anymore going through the forest, interiors of the forest during daytime, during nighttime. For her, forest. So here we see how the dual dynamic between man and human beings and nature is gradually being blurred. She is at one with nature. She says at one point in the film that she lost her mother at a very early age. So for her, nature is the mother. So in her case, so we talk about how nature being the mother, but in her case, we see how she internalized the very efficacy, very ability of nature to be a life giver, somebody and the nature and agency which can sustain livelihood on the, and we see her, if we study her life, we see that happening right, throughout the course of the movie. And then we come across, the different officials, right from the head clerk to the other, sort of petty, workers who are stealing firewood. Then this specific variety of a leaf called the kopat. Kopat is used to actually wrap rice, and it's served to serve. It's generally used to keep rice warm. It's also used as to wrap food items. Just the way we use aluminium foil, kopat is used for that. So they steal, and it's very rare. They are not found everywhere. They're found only in specific regions. So that's why they're valued. And obviously they deliver those items at the shop, and from the shop those are put into the bus, and the bus takes those items to the city. So we see a nexus going on, and this is something which is very common. We see that happening in many other films as well. And then with the appearance of the forest officer, Topan Borua, we see when he arrives at the station, and this is like the variety of a person, that the typical honest officer which we come across in many Hindi films, that he is constantly transferred. He's not, he has not been able to spend time properly at any particular, position, because obviously he meddles with these machineries, and he's constantly transferred. So we see him again coming into a new place, and en route to his home, he sees pile of logs near the railway station. He gets down, examines them, and sees that those were illegally cut. So he puts the scissor hammer there, and he confiscates them. And those illegal timbers actually belonged to Mohesh Chaudhary. He's the smuggler. He's like the mafia, the gang, the leader of the gang which is engaged in such activities in the region. And now, this movie begins on a very wider social scale, and with the appearance of Tapan Borua, we are given a glimpse into their life. He's there with his wife Ruby, and they have a son who is unwell. He has a heart disease, and they are planning to take him to Vellore for treatment. But obviously, they aren't being able to, collect enough money for treatment, and also the very fact that he is transferred constantly, he hasn't been able to give enough time for his family. And then we see how his thought process, how his vision is constantly attached to the forest. Even at nighttime, at the bedtime, he's thinking about forest. He's thinking about erosion. He's talking about the rainforest. He's reading books. While his wife, I found his wife, the Ruby's character, very fascinating because this movie is also about how the character of Ruby, the character undergoes a transformation from a disgruntled wife who is constantly complaining about not getting enough attention from her husband, to somebody who at the end of the movie she stands as a support with to her husband, that no, she says something at the end of the movie. I'll come to that. The very end, last shot of the movie, one of the later shots of the movie, she says something which is very pertinent to our discussion here. I'll come to that at a later stage. So her character is something worth discussing, the transformation that happens. Now connected to these, we can raise another question, that what are the factors which bring about a change in her attitude towards her husband? Because see, in Ruby's case, it's not only the case of her attitude towards her husband changing, it is also her attitude towards nature is also changing, because she's complaining. I mean, every time she is, they are transferred to one of those reserve forests, those places where there are only forests all around, with constant sound of the crickets, very monotonous lifestyle, nothing, nowhere to go. Just there's a garden at the front yard and nowhere else to go. So for her, this is a very monotonous existence. But so how eventually she learns to live with it? So how she grapples, how she comes, how she becomes at one with her own environment, and what are the factors which enable her to do this? This is another issue that we can discuss. Now, one important character is that of Gauri, because there's this scene where Gauri comes and brings uh, a bag of eggs, for Ruby, and that's the first meeting of Gauri and Ruby. Gauri is somebody we can see her coming straight from within nature. She's nature's child, if we can use the term, nature's daughter. So she comes to her arrival, her entry into the life of Ruby is as if nature has arrived into Ruby's life as a very benevolent spirit, not a disturbing spirit, as it has. Her letters to her mother, testifies to her, restless spirit. But the arrival of Gauri it somewhat neutralizes that feeling of this, of discontentment with her present situation in life. And while talking with Gauri, she also goes to visits her place. And obviously, from a later conversation in the kitchen, we see that Gauri keeps on visiting her. So in this way, Gauri provides her a way to integrate herself not only with nature, but in due course of time also with her husband. Because she asks Gauri that, that my husband doesn't spend much time at home. He's only thinking about the forests. Then Gauri says, no, he's the best person. He's the best officer. All of us like him. Why do we like him? Because he says so many good things. What are those good things? He talks about forest. He talks about the positive, aspects of nature. What? So basically, this aspect of Tapan Barua's life, Ruby had not seen, or even though she had seen, her perspective was different. So Gauri enables her to look at her husband's life from a different angle. That yes, he may not be thinking about me, he may not be thinking about our son, but he is engaged with a larger issue. Now if we talk about Tapan Barua, now there are a few scenes that there's a dreams, if we see there's a recurring vision or a dream sequence that we see throughout the movie. There's this story goes that Tapan Barua, when he was a child, he wanted to make a small catapult. To make a catapult, he actually he cut down a whole tree. So that feeling of guilt was there within him, that stayed within him. And as if to atone for his sin, he decides to dedicate his whole life to the cause of the forest. So even for Topon Borwa, there is a reason, to do whatever he can for the uplift, for the betterment or the preservation of the ecological system. So that is also one factor that comes in when we try to do a character analysis. And then all of a sudden, there's a very small point, the sequence where we see an elephant attack, which the elephant, the herd of elephant which comes and attacks the villagers. And then that's one important, very short scene. And then there's another scene towards maybe halfway through the movie. It shows the beginning of petroleum drilling. And this also accompanied by a few lines of poetry. And I find that that particular sequence very prophetic. How petroleum drilling, in search of reserves, they have also intruded into the nature, into the natural space, into the forest reserves. And only, I think, 2 years back, 3 years back, in fact, around the same time in 2020, there's a place in Assam called Bagjan, where there was a natural gas leakage. So it was burning for so many days, so many months. So that was a huge ecological disaster that happened in Assam, almost during the first COVID wave that happened. So this is something which is very prophetic on the part of the director to show something which is in few years time, this is going to be one of the major, factor of this anthropocentric domination of human beings. So much so that we have a new genre of literature called petrofiction. So this is also something that was in 1989, I guess this was still maybe the genre had just started. So this is another something that Janu Barua envisioned this is going to happen in the coming days. And anyway, throughout the movie we come across the Topon Barua's through means of edifying, through means of educating the villagers. He talks about soil erosion. He talks about about the rainforests. He talks about droughts and how natural disasters could be averted. So here the cinema, how the director has also encoded a social message along with the narrative. So this is not only a cinema which is for the purpose of entertainment, but the cinema also has a very overt socio-cultural message, very a message that is addressed directly to the audience through the means of this character called Topon Borua. And all right, so after that, so I've talked about the conversation between Ruby and Gauri. And then there's another interesting character of the head clerk with his wig. So we see him, obviously, kind of a very, he is corrupt, but he's also a kind of womanizer. So he wears a wig to hide his bald head. So at the end of the movie, when the typist, she comes with her husband, newly married, he removes that wig from his head. And that wig, if we remember, that wig was actually gifted to him by Mahesh Chaudhary, the smuggler. So that his very act of removing the wig also signifies a kind of character change within him, because this wig is also a symbolic, the symbol of what should I say, of corruption. So the very removal of his wig is not only his acceptance of his own social lot, his lot in life, but also recognition of the fact that no, what he has been doing so far is not good. So we also see a change in his character through the later stage of the movie. And yes, now at the beginning of this presentation, I talked about a kind of simultaneity, how we see worshipping nature, and how the deforestation, how this was happening on a simultaneous note. And the movie ends on a similar note, where there's a long sequence of the Karam Puja, a festival, a worship of the indigenous communities, and how, taking advantage of Karam Puja, how the smugglers were planning to smuggle out the timber in the dead of the night. So this is how it is shown towards the climax of the movie, how they tried to, smuggle out the timber, thinking that the villagers would be busy in their festivities throughout the night, taking advantage of the sound and dance. They'd be able to smuggle out the timber, which somehow doesn't happen. But towards the maybe I'll stop now. But towards the end of this movie, Ruby comes up with this very important statement, which actually sums up for this, the spirit of the filmmaker. She says that I'm just reading the English translation, that the forest has become a part of our life now. This is her realization, that the forest has become a part of our life. So, and we must be careful that she has not resigned to her fate, that no, I mean, there's no other way, the forest, but she stands beside her husband, no, we'll go to a new place, we'll again work. Okay, you might be transferred again, but we'll keep up with our endeavor to preserve nature, because nature has become so that the whole human nature binary, it has blurred, it has been dismantled. And Ruby is the one who was so conscious about, those conflicting aspects of life, material aspects, her family aspects. At the end, she's the one who stands by her husband and, sort of emphasizes upon the essential spirit behind this whole cinematic endeavor of showing the integrative connection, relationship between human beings and nature. And this is how the movie ends with how the villagers confront the truck carrying the smuggled timber, and how they confront the timber merchant. And this is the point where the movie ends. So obviously he's caught red-handed, and we know what's going to happen. He's caught red-handed. So whether he comes out of accused by the police or whatever happened, this is something none of our concern. But it ends with basically how the inhabitants of the Bongao Forest Reserve, how they somehow assert their authority over the forces of corruption and forces of the unholy forces of human civilization. So maybe I can stop here, and we can discuss further. So thank you, Geeta ma'am, for this opportunity.
Yeah,
thank
you very much, Dhurjjati, for that very well formulated argument and a very complex reading of the film. Like you, I too found almost like these parallel narratives. On the one hand, the husband-wife relationship, and then, of course, on the other hand, the issues of the forest and corruption and so on. And in the end, I thought the wife's transformation almost had a spiritual quality to it, almost like Emerson's
transcendentalism. Yes.
Transcendentalism. I kind of thought of that while watching the end scenes of the film. So it's now open for discussion. Anyone would like to come in with unfortunately, the YouTube print was a bad print. We had some trouble viewing it. It's a beautiful film and so well made and well shot, but the print was not.
Yes, I tried exploring, but I couldn't. I just found this.
Yeah, I know. Yeah. Sometimes it happens we don't get very good prints of the film. But otherwise, a very lovely film. Thank you for for suggesting this film. Anyone would like to come in at this point? Yes, Rajan, please.
Yeah, I would like to say that when I looked at the movie, there is this whole idea of the forest department and the idea of colonialism and the idea of being post-colonial subjects which come in, right? And it's, you talk very nicely about the Anthropocene, but what is the colonial and post-colonial legacy of the forest guards? And maybe we were better off without them, right? And the tribals would look after, fell some trees and preserve the forest also, right? But we are actually into this post-colonial thing, and we've got Cobbett National Park and all sorts of fancy things where Cobbett really is not a preserver of wildlife or anything of the sort. So we're talking about a post-colonial hangover, which we have this forest department, and it's not that it was very great in its own time, but it's also something that is a legacy of colonialism.
Yes, yes, you are right there, because yeah. So should I respond one by one, Geetaji?
Yeah, sure. Please go ahead.
Yeah, yes, certainly, absolutely. I mean, this whole, the administrative structure of the forest department, range officers, bungalows, guards, and everything. Yeah, and this is reminiscent of the colonial, machinery. Yes, certainly. I mean, this is another aspect, whether or not we need those departments, whether or not we need the entire machinery at place. Why can't the indigenous communities be allowed to administer those regions by themselves, right? And this is one important, this struggle is not merely administrative. This struggle is also, how should I put it, also in a way religious, also cultural as well. Because if we see, the colonial machinery was not merely administrative, it was also missionary. So in one of those, it may so happen, I wouldn't have been surprised that they could have even shown a church somewhere there. There are churches, there are missionaries who are actively engaged in proselytizing those indigenous communities. They are doing that, right? So this is something which is still there. Even if we go and visit those reserves, you will find the administrative structure and also the missionary structure at place. Right. So that begs the question. So as I said, so just in the way we are arguing that we can do away with the machinery, with the administrative machinery, in a similar way, we can also argue that we can also do away with this whole missionary enterprise and also talk about, reviving those animist worldview. And this is something also present in some of the recent works of fiction which have come from the Northeast, in Tim Sulau's fiction, in Eastern Kire's fiction. We see a kind of a revival of that animist worldview, which talks about a sense of, how should I put it, a sense of self-dependence, a sense of autonomy of, how the communities had a mechanism within themselves to look after their own requirements, right? So here, what I will be more interested in looking at how those dynamics have played out, rather than talking about whether or not we should let the system stay, or whether it should go away. Maybe we can talk more about how the revival of, we can take a hypothetical scenario. What if we allow for a revival of the authority of the indigenous, if I may put it this way? So what could be the newer ways of looking at, the forest aesthetics, if we may say? So this is one way of looking at it. And secondly, if we look at the history of Assam or history of the Northeast in general, there have been a sense of conflicting opinions about forest lands, whether or not forest lands are necessary. Because in the middle of the 19th century, when the 19th century Assamese intellectuals, when they were first exposed to colonial education, and we had a person who is like the Assamese Ram Mohan Roy, called Anandaram Hekial Fukon. So he talks about his dream that in Assam, a day will come when all the forest lands will be transformed into gardens. It talks about, in Assamese, he says that Habi Gusi Fulbari Hobo. Right. So in this way, we can also look at how forests have been transformed into gardens. We don't say tea, we say tea gardens. So this whole colonial administrative machinery is also, this also there in terms of aestheticizing the forest into something like nature methodized. Obviously, how the forest and a garden is like, a garden is a nature methodized. There are line systems, there's specific ways of classifying different trees, plants, and everything that has happened. So the colonial machinery or the post-colonial machinery, actually, they go a long way in terms of how they have impacted upon, if I may use that particular phrase, methodizing nature. And how at the present era, we can talk about proposing an alternative way of looking at nature. In a way critiquing some of those structures and see in the 21st century how we can talk about reviving some of those, this consciousness, and see how it can fit in with our present paradigms of thought. I don't have a straightforward answer to your question. So, because this is something, we are not in a position to do anything about it, but maybe, at the level of polemic, we can possibly talk about these happenings through these perspectives. I hope I have somehow managed to answer you.
Yeah, thank you, Dhurjjati. Yes, Nikhila.
Thank you very much for suggesting this film. I managed actually to finish watching it only some 10 minutes before the discussion. So I haven't entirely processed.
It's fresh in your memory, it's fresh.
Yes, but I haven't thought much about it either. So one of the things that struck me, and maybe you can tell us, a little bit more about this particular aspect is, this, and what you also just now said about the indigenous people owning up, the forest, the protection of the forest, so that the state authorities become, they don't need to interfere in this process. So it belongs to them and they own up its upkeep. In fact, in southern India, whether it's in Kerala or in Karnataka, in fact, it is the tribals, the indigenous people who are often seen to be in conflict with the state, precisely over their claimed rights to the forest land, which is often, they are seen as people who are illegal occupants, or they are seen as people who are harmful to the forest because they may indulge in some small-time agricultural activities, or they may, depend upon forest land produce. So in fact, they are this whole idea of the film's climax, where these people in some ways, now the forest official, the ranger is no longer necessary. They are awakened enough, so to speak, to protect their own land. But in the southern context, this would seem somewhat, or at least today, maybe because this film was made in the 80s, in 89, it was possible. But in the present day context, a lot of conflicts are not necessarily human versus a forest or nature or whatever. It is among those who see themselves, for instance, the state which sees itself as a protector of forest, and who see indigenous people and tribals as people who are incursive, who are the ones, who are dangerous to the forest. So I was just wondering, how this film plays out in a scenario like that. The second thing is, simply by way of comparison, and it's a film that also reminded me of this Kannada film called Cheluvi, which is based on this flowering tree, one of the folk tales of A.K. Ramanujan. Which is again quite similar in the sense of, but of course a little more metaphorical, not the kind of realistic filmmaking that we know of Janu Barua. So it's a different register of filmmaking, but I was thinking maybe it would be interesting to put together a corpus of such environmental films, if one could call it that, across different languages to see how they represent, human nature kind of relations. Thank you very much for sparking off all these questions and ideas. Over to you, Geeta.
Yeah, thank you, Nikhila. Yes, please, Dhurjjati.
Thank you, Nikhila ma'am, for this for these remarks. Yes, certainly. I mean, there's a scene in the early part of the movie where we see that head clerk calling to women, the tribal women. They're passing by carrying a bunch of leaves, and he calls them. The first scene where we see the head clerk and asks that, where have you collected these leaves from? And they say that from the forest. They say, don't you think this is illegal to collect stuff from the forest without permission? No, they are not. So what we come across here is something, we're talking about a conflict, right? So I see this as a conflict, or rather a kind of an interface maybe between what is referred to as natural right and also what are you entitled to. Because most of this, and in the course of the movie, we come across this to this fact, the inhabitants of this reserve, they were rehabilitated inhabitants, because they were placed at another place because that place was washed away by floods. So they were relocated into that particular reserve area, but they were allowed to stay within that forest reserve. They are not like the indigenous communities, who have like the memories of place. There's a concept that, where communities have stayed there across generations. So those people who are living in those reserves, they are not like those. So I guess we need to make subtle, differences. We need to be alive to those nuances about their claims to the rights of the forest. So even though they do not belong to that forest in terms of living there for generations, yet the very fact that they are tea garden workers or they are working in the forest, they feel entitled to use some of the resources which grow naturally in the forest. But this begs the question that is it that who then sort of empowers the administrative authorities to put a ban on the usage of those forest resources? Because there are also, and this is something that even in the present day we come across the problem, as you said, about in the south, where there are conflicts between these inhabitants and the government. Here in Assam also there are issues about encroachment, illegal encroachment of the forested land, of the forested area. Now, from a very governmental perspective, from a very revenue-centric perspective, yes, they're encroachers because they are illegally living in a land where they are not paying revenue. They are also sort of, utilizing the benefits of nature which should not be utilized in that way, but in a different way, within a, they are not following the procedure as far as the usage of natural resources are concerned. So here this dichotomy is evident. There is a natural way and way of using those, of accessing those natural of those resources, and there is a very protocol driven way of utilizing those resources. You are allowed to cut a tree, but if it is within permissible that region, and if it is mandated officially, you can cut a tree, you can cut down a tree. But if you do it without official permission, that's illegal. So the very issues of how the very act of cutting a tree, if we apply natural law, the very act of cutting down a tree is illegal. The very act of cutting a tree is something which we can refer to as unnatural or anti-natural. But if it's done with official permission, that's allowed. So how do we, this is a very Orwellian kind of a situation, how words or the ways of putting define, the way of our actions, justifies the legality or illegality of our actions. I find this very Orwellian, actually. So anyway, this is how, these things have happened. This is how it has happened all these years. And yeah, and also most of this forested area, they are also the hideouts of many antisocial elements. So it is also not possible to leave these spaces unmonitored. There's also the danger, accompanying danger, particularly in the Northeast, and we are all aware of that. How there are antisocial elements which may cause disturbance to the society. So these areas, they have to be kept under vigilance. These areas have to be kept under strict monitoring. So this is a difficult situation. So which law should we adhere to, the natural law or the constitutional law? Because this is, I guess, at the end of the day, it's a conflict of on these dimensions, on the legal frameworks. So anyway, maybe let's see how we can deal with this way. It requires further introspection, I guess.
Thank you. Any other questions, comments?
There was this recent film that came out very recently, and I was also looking for that film. That's a movie called Borkharunno, The Rainforest. This came out, I guess, few years back. So this is also another film which deals with this kind of issues of corruption, intrusion, encroachment. So it's an Assamese movie called Borkharunno, A Rainforest. So I don't know if it is available. I watched that movie in TV. So I don't know if it's available online, but that's also another movie worth watching.
In the last scene, where you have the indigenous people actually collectivizing and resisting these corrupt forces. Towards the end, there is one person who is shown with a gun. So, right at the end. So, do you think the filmmaker is suggesting, weaponizing these groups is, a kind of a solution, or maybe it is something that they have to necessarily resort to, that is the only way to resist these corrupt forces? Because it ended with that, I was just wondering if we should read some significance into that, or am I just overreading?
Even I felt that, and even I had this feeling that this could be the police, the intervention of the police, because obviously the main person, the main convict behind this intervention, he was there in the truck. So maybe he was caught red-handed. So the police intervention this could be one of the way, one of those ways. And as far as weaponizing is concerned, maybe this is safe. The whole this entire endeavor of this timber business of stealing these leaves, and this is part of a larger nexus. As you see that bus which collects firewood and everything, it doesn't ferry out. The bus carries those stuff to the city. And also how this timber merchant is also financing the elections. So this is the problem, or the solution to it is not merely in weaponizing or empowering one faction against the other, but the solution is something which is very, the problem is very deep-seated. It's not only just one-dimensional program, one-dimensional predicament. The MLA figures in very prominently in the nexus. So he brings in, and also he is shown as promising the villagers that I will construct a canal here, I will do this, I will do that, right? So that the whole legislative machinery also comes into the picture with the character of the MLA and the whole financing business. So I guess I see this as part of a larger nexus, and that forest reserve is a very microcosmic representation of the conflicts which are being played out in the wider arena. So if we have to find solution to this particular problem, we have to at first solve those other problems, which is because these are basically what all connected issues. So,
Right.
so I guess we need to look into the bigger picture to find the solution to this.
Right.
And also the very confrontation, there's a scene where the Topan Barua, the forest ranger, complains to his immediate senior about the whole business, about the police or the senior, the hierarchies, they're not taking enough action. So he gets a very ambivalent response. So that shows how other forces are at play, how external forces are at play.
Right.
When I see a message in the chat box, maybe comment question.
Yes, please. I think it's just.
Yeah.
Yeah, I don't have the name here. It's
Yes.
Realme RMX3. Please come in. Please come in. Are you there? I'm sorry, I don't.
He's here.
Geeta, if you have time, I would also like to come in sometime.
Oh, okay. Sure. Please, Jyotirmoy, come in.
Hello, sir.
Hi, Dhurjjati.
Thank you for joining in, sir. It's a pleasure to have you.
I had the whole lecture of yours, and thank you first of all to Geeta and the Talking Films for having introduced this particular movie. In fact, I wasn't aware of this Bonani earlier, that this is the movie Jahanabura made. This is one discovery for me, and I also appreciate the way you have analyzed the entire movie almost, scene by scene. So that is also, it shows your total involvement with the whole movie. Also brought in some kind of new dimensions to look at this film. And of course, there are certain things I would just like to observe. One is, of course, one thing is that this is a reserve forest. The story is about reserve forest. And reserve forest is a very paradoxical terminology. This whole idea came during the British period, around 1927 or around that time, And the idea of reserve forest also is associated with this development paradigm when they needed so much of timber because of railways. So they needed a lot of timber, So they used to earmark forest as reserve forest, which has remained till today, which essentially means this is extractivist forest, that is, you can extract the forest resources, which can be extracted only by the state, by the government. And one important thing is that when it comes to reserve forest, the inhabitants, they do not have any kind of a right inside the reserve forest. Though there's some people were bringing firewood from inside the reserve forest, the leaves they were bringing out from the reserve forest. In fact, they do not have that kind of a right to bring anything. It is entirely government property. Whenever government needs timber for its own revenue generation, so they can really cut the trees. That is one paradox. And government is, of course, represented by DFO, the rangers, the forest guards. So this is the and they can also, from within the reserve forest, they can also extract some other minerals like sands, then of course rocks and other kind of stuff. So that is one paradigm here. Okay, that is. And when it comes to, of course, sanctuaries, that is another interesting thing. In sanctuaries, common people have some kind of access inside the forest, but in the reserve forest, they do not have. And of course, when it comes to national park, even the common people do not have any kind of access to the national parks. And that is one reason why when this particular forest, that is which was earlier known as Joy Dihing, and now this is called it Dihing Patkai. So people who actually started the movement, they wanted to keep it as a kind of a sanctuary instead of a national park. Because optics is that national parks means as if it is more protected. When in the national park, what happens? Even earlier, this particular forest also, that is which we know as the Dihing Patkai, was also a reserve forest. There's rampant amount of, tremendous amount of felling of trees and all. The whole Upper Assam, timber industry, that was developed out of that particular forest. So they wanted to make it as kind of a sanctuary, so that common people can have, all these villagers can have some access to the forest. As soon as it becomes a national park, of course, they cannot have any kind of access. So that is one irony about the whole, dimensions of forest categorization. So that is one. So whatever happens in the process, the people, they gradually get legally alienated from the territories of the reserve forest. That is one aspect of it. And that is when Tapan Barua comes, he says that how come there's not any kind of seals of the forest? Okay, that means the same, what you have mentioned, that the same timber, when government has seal, then it becomes legal. Okay,
Right.
Without seal, it becomes illegal. So government has the kind of right to, fell as much tree as they want to. That is one aspect of it. And secondly, so this is one irony, of course, in that particular film. Then what I found quite striking, you have also mentioned that about Anthropocene. Gita has also mentioned the last part of it. Two characters, that is Gauri and Ruby, Ruby's wife. And Gauri represents metaphorically the forest itself. Okay, without the forest, she does not exist, and she's a metaphorical child of the forest.
Child of nature, yes.
Mother is not important. She says, "My nature, these trees are my mother." Okay,
Yes.
so that is what she says. So metaphorically, she actually represents, or personifies the meaning of a forest. And one thing is that, despite the fact that Tapan Barua was so committed to protect the forest, he was always vulnerable somehow. We found that there's a lot of other kind of paraphernalia that would not allow him to work freely, and he knew that there were a lot of obstacles in front of him. Okay? Including when he comes home, he tries to convince his wife. Of course, his wife has her own kind of anxieties and concerns and preferences. But at the last moment, when he says, "I'm defeated once more," when he was transferred, he comes back home and he says, "I'm defeated once more." And that is the moment when Ruby says that since the forest ultimately has become part of her life.
Yes.
And from now on in this mission, you are not alone.
Yeah.
And that is the moment, when actual empowerment occurs. So how, he has centralizes, despite the fact that there's a man, he is a central figure there, but actually triumph or a kind of the rites of passage comes through these two women characters.
Yes,
Why women are so important in order to carry on this particular mission of protecting forests. That is one. That is how we can have a reading about this. Then again, another aspect I would like to again highlight, that is the relationship between man and forest. That one thing is important, Somadev Datta, what the film you have mentioned about Borharan, no? That was based on Somadev Datta's that book, Namsang on Tehpur.
Yes.
That is the book, that is a book about the whole movement. I think Gita had also, I think, read a bit of that because I sent one of the translations of that particular book. In that book, he proposes one very significant thing, that forest is a syncretic category. A forest is not only about trees, and also not only about the birds and the wildlife. Okay? Even human beings are also part of this forest ecology. They are part of the forest syntax. And that is why these people, these Adivasis, without them also forest cannot sustain. Despite the fact that sometimes they might be, extracting some firewood or some leaves, that would not actually pose any kind of danger to the forest. Despite they were doing illegal things, because inside from a reserve forest, you are not supposed to bring out anything. But they were bringing on the back of a bicycle. They just bring one bundle of firewood. Okay, you can contrast that with truckload of timbers were again carried out by the nexus of these local timber merchants and the politicians. And this is a typical narrative and typical sort of a nexus all over, not only all over India, I would say, and of course all over the world, in Amazon forest, all over the world. So this is something extremely alarming, and of course this is quite relevant in the context of Assam in the sense that because we have lost huge amount of forest cover.
Yes.
Okay. Yeah, and that is perhaps because of this particular nexus, because ultimately the government has a right to destroy forests legally through this reserve forest. That is one dimension to that. Another dimension that what Rajan has just spoken about, the post-colonial dimension, when of course we had discussed about how projectization happened and kind of. But I would have a different kind of a reading. What my personal view is that Christianity, in a way, Christianity, when we say Christianity in the Northeast context, that is also we refer to the indigenous people, essentially. Okay? Because most of the indigenous people have adopted Christianity in the hills.
Right.
So be it Nagaland, Mizoram, even Manipur. Manipur, Christianity is right. But the history of those communities have been intricately related to forests, and that has not been largely disrupted. Apart from where there has been rampant urbanization in cities like Shillong and all these places, of course. There's like loss of. So in that sense, my reading is that Christianity is not exactly at conflict with this particular idea of protecting forest. That is what my that is how empirically that is my understanding. When I found that thing, that is one. But another thing I have found when it comes to our Hinduism, two stories are quite striking in the context of Northeast. One is Parasuram Kundo. Parasuram Kundo is in Arunachal. Okay. When I went to Arunachal, then they were saying that they cannot relate that particular space with Parashuram mythology. Okay, that particular village. Now, of course, the BJP government, and they wanted to turn that into a major tourist spot. Parashuram Kundo. There was a program to bring 1 lakh sadhus from India. That mainland
of the country. Yes.
To sanctify Parashuram Kundo again. All right. So now, but local villagers have different kind of story about that Kundo, that is the water body. Okay. Their thing is, when Parashuram is the one who had killed his mother, okay, the local story has the Parashuram, that particular Kundo was made by a boy who wanted to protect her mother. So it's entirely different. Okay, mother is also there in that story. All right. So that but that particular story has now been subsumed by this Parashuram Kunda narrative. That is one. How this kind of tribal mythological space have been appropriated by our Indian mythologies. That is, and thereby these communities have been alienated from their own geography or own intimate landscape. Another thing, recently it happened that Jyotirlinga in Karbi Anglong, in Assam government has announced one Jyotirlinga in Karbi Anglong, if you know that thing. And that is a Karbi a shrine. That is essentially a Karbi shrine. Karbi people used to go there, and now it has been declared as a Jyotirlinga. And when it happens again as a Jyotirlinga, this Karbi people again got alienated from their own ancient shrine, and because that has become a very Hinduized kind of shrine, it has become many pujaris and priests, they have now appropriated the space. So this is how. But in case of what religion they were showing in that film, that is Karma Utsav,
Karam
and all these things, which is quite quite associated or linked with the nature. If the trees are not there, the forest is not there, even that would get disrupted. So it reminds me of how this one Batas Masake, Lian Batas Masake, who would be speaking about why the land and the forest is a pedagogy of the indigenous people.
Right. Yes.
So and if that is disrupted, the whole pedagogy falls apart. So this is how I think we can have some kind of reading about that film. But I must appreciate the way you have opened up some of the aspects that initially even did not strike to us, basically.
Thank you, sir.
And another thing, of course, the last point. Sorry, I'm just taking a little bit of time.
Please, I mean, these are like valuable suggestions.
One thing I was looking at that Adibasi, tea garden, and forest. Okay, Adibasis were there because of the tea garden.
Yes.
Okay, right, in the Assam context, and there's the erosion from the tea gardens. But tea garden is primarily responsible for the highest amount of deforestation in the Assam.
Yes.
Okay. So this is a kind of an irony. Normally we go to Assam and we feel so good, so much of greenery, but these are all mostly occupied by the big capitalist companies, multinational, where local people do not have any kind of an access to that. But even this Dihing Patka and all this, those were part of that range only, those major tea gardens. So those ranges were finished, tea gardens occupied or appropriated or encroached. So real encroachment of the land happened through tea gardens.
When I talked about methodized, I mean, how did it was a kind of how
and that narrative also was a garden turning into garden.
Dhurjjati Sarma talks about the empire's garden. The very act of how. No, and also Dhekial Fukon's the dream of Habigusi Pulbari.
This is Anthropocene in a sense that these jungles you can turn into beautiful manicured gardens.
Yes.
And this is the narrative because of that it justified why so many people.
Anthropocentric endeavor, our forests are being turned into gardens.
Yeah.
Right, so, thank you, sir.
Thank you so much, Geeta, for giving me a bit of time, and thank you so much for being introduced to this wonderful film. Actually,
Thank you so much, Jyotirmoy, coming out with your insights. Delightful. Thank you.
Okay, if I can just quickly respond to your remarks, maybe I'll start with the latest. I mean, the last point, I'll go in that way, the reverse direction. So you talked about how, sort of defining certain narratives, redefining or sort of in terms of pan-Indian description. I guess this is a kind of a dynamic between a very localized narrative, a localized metaphor, and trying to give it a pan-Indian dimension to garner a wider response. And this is all obviously, I feel, to transform or rather to enhance the potential of a place from a very tourism perspective of tourism. It requires to have a narrative which can strike chord with a larger section of people. So possibly that is also a kind of a drive on the part of the powers that be to redefine, re-narrativize some of these locales so that it could be slotted appropriately within a pan-Indian narrative. So yes, I mean, so this causes us a conflict, but maybe certain narratives also exist simultaneously. So maybe we can look at them as parallel narratives because as far as the local knowledge forms are alive, they will always look into the local, and this is existent everywhere. I mean, this kind of a local narrative, and as well as a narrative which is placed before the larger audience or the larger parlance. And then coming to Christianity, I mean, I don't see Christianity as as sort of being one side of a conflict, but Christianity as introducing a different kind of an epistemology for the indigenous population. So, which somewhat tried to reorient their attitude towards nature in a certain way. So, whether we see that reorientation as destructive, or we see that as continuing with the prevalent thought processes of, the hitherto prevalent thought processes of those inhabitants, I guess that differs from community to community. Depends on various other factors. But this is certain that I don't see Christianity as a disruptive factor, but I see this as introducing a different epistemological, a knowledge system for the communities, and based on their interaction with this new knowledge system, there could have been certain areas of disengagement, certain areas of them trying to grapple with newer ways of looking at the world. So that we see most evidently in the current in the fictions of, as I said, the Solao's fiction, or in Sterling Kire's in their fiction, we see that coming in. And yes, certainly the idea of the relationship between Ruby and Gauri, how it actually and picks up in the second half of the movie, actually, as we see, how Ruby and Gauri's relationship actually provides a new lease of life to the narrative of the movie. Like if there's an interval at the second part, of the movie. And then coming to the idea of reserve forest, there's also the issue of resettlement, which is the idea of inhabitants. There is also the idea of resettlement of people within certain marked areas of the forest is something that is shown in the course of the movie. So how some communities are given place to stay. So this resettlement, I guess, is also something somewhat paradoxical, because they're supposed to be reserved forest, but yet then we're allowing people to stay. And one point, maybe this is what we can talk about, is the very idea of propitiation. Nature requires propitiation. The spirits, they have to be appeased from time to time. So who is going to appease them? Who's going to worship them? Who's going to show their due respect? So I guess for that, one requires certain active agents. So the human beings here, or they with their own worldviews, possibly their presence within a forested area and their attitude towards the forest, worshipping the forest, propitiating the forest spirits. If you don't propitiate it, it might, the forest may come back at you. The very idea of benevolent spirits and malevolent spirits. So these are basically conceptualized within, within the thought process of the, the human mind. So maybe we can have, this is the question, that the very idea about the nature being malevolent, the nature of benevolent nature, living nature. So do they have existence outside the human mind? The very sacrality of nature that we are talking about, that is also shown as part of the indigenous worldview. So aren't they also the creation of the Anthropocene? So maybe I feel these are questions which actually bothered me, while I was watching the movie. So maybe, these are some of the queries, some of the concerns that we may, subsequently, or maybe we can keep engaging with. But actually watching this movie actually left me with more questions than answers. So anyway, so thank you, sir, for putting forward your perspectives.
Thank you, Dhurjjati. Thank you so much.
Thank you, sir. Maybe we, at a later date, if we meet, we can.
Yeah, I'm thinking of introducing this film in my course also. We're doing decolonial.
That would be great, sir. Yeah, over to you, Geeta.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you, Dhurjjati and Jyotirmoy. Any more questions, comments? Madhurima, would you like to say something?
Yeah, most of the things have been discussed already. So I really enjoyed watching the film. And what I think is significant in the film is the end of the film. I did not expect the representation of the indigenous communities resisting on their own. So I thought maybe the change would come on the personal level of Ruby. But when I found at the end that the indigenous communities, or if I can call them indigenous communities, mainly the tea garden communities, who are resisting the forces on their own without the help of the forest ranger or anyone from the mainstream communities, that is significant. That is a change coming from within. So there is some hope in that aspect. So thank you for letting us watch the film. Thank you.
Yes, certainly. I mean, this is, you can say that they, the timber, the timber, the smugglers, they wanted to take opportunity of the festivities. They would not have any inkling about what they are doing, but they were proved wrong. So that's what I'm saying. So, and they were all engaged in Karam Puja, right? So we may also see this as a very kind of also a spiritual empowerment. That that the very fact that they were worshipping nature, the very fact that they, through that particular ritual, they renewed their engagement with the natural forces, right? So their resurgence towards the end of the movie could be spiritual as well as collective. I mean, like collective in a sense of socially collective. So there are many ways of looking at it, looking at this particular collective action towards the end, where they motivated, spiritually motivated, religiously, motivated through a kind of something that came within them, or they were sufficiently inspired by the words of Toponboro. And also it could be, and also we might see this as an act of revenge, because we haven't talked about the fact that his transfer order came right when he was sitting there in the midst of the festivities. That's where, I guess, if I'm not, I think that's where he received that letter, because he was sitting there and he came home. So obviously the people out there, they got to know about the fact that this officer has been transferred. So the very act of their rising against the timber merchant could also be an immediate retaliation. They know that the transfer orders have come through this particular nexus. So the very act of confronting the Mohet Chaudhary at the end could also be their immediate reaction to that, to the transfer. Maybe they're resisting that, no, we will not let him go. He has to stay with us and within us. So this could be another way of looking at the ending.
Yes, and also if you see in the entire film, in the other instances, I did not find the communities speaking for themselves. Like in the beginning, probably when the head clerk was talking to the people, and he was addressing them as like, you people always do this. So there is a kind of dialectic that is going on between these people and the communities. So there is a hierarchy that is prevalent. And in the entire film, apart from the last section, I do not see the communities speaking for their rights. Except the relationship between Ruby and Gauri is interesting, because Ruby tells Gauri to address her as sister. So it would be interesting to see how the relationships are going on there.
I think there's a small scene in the early part of the movie when there's a guy from the workers who's trying to sort of build a workers' union. And he's
Yes, yes,
confronted
yes.
by
That is in
Mahesh
Mahesh
Chaudhary.
Chaudhary.
He
Yeah, yeah.
confronts them. Now that workers' union could also be an kind of an endeavor on the part of the community to articulate their concerns, to articulate their voices. Could be one way of looking at it. So yes, but so maybe the last scene could also be seen as one way where they could be seen as talking about or sort of rising in support of their own concerns. So we see them rising in a collective manner towards the end of the movie, whereas throughout the movie we see them, and also possibly the director maybe also wanted to emphasize the primacy of nature there, because throughout the movie we there is the nature is the foreground. Throughout the movie we have seen that nature is the foreground. So maybe he was emphasizing more on the primacy of nature rather than talking about the rights of the communities, rights of the indigenous communities, and things like that. Maybe he was trying more to focus on how nature, benefits of nature, or because this is something a stated thing. At the beginning of the movie only there's a preamble which it shows how nature requires to be preserved in order to sustain the sustain living beings on this planet. So maybe this was something that he may have thought about in this particular way. I don't know. I mean, this is maybe this would require maybe further investigation.
Yeah. Anyway,
Thank-
thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you, Madhurima. Thank you, Dhurjjati.
Yeah, Geeta, can I come in?
Yes, please.
Yeah,
Sai.
so there is so much of discussion about the end of the film. So I would like to start with the end of the film, as Geeta raised the question of violence or the use of arms by the villagers. So I see it like in terms of narrative, that this is the moment where the protagonist is the weakest. His morale is down. He is disappointed, and till now he has emerged as a hero, as an individual who is also a state agent, who is interested in protecting the environment, and he can also, because he has some power. But that is also the moment when the protection of the environment, from being an individual enterprise, turns into a collective enterprise. So that way, this end is interesting, because now the villagers, they are like together in order to protect the environment. And what happens now, the ranger cannot intervene. Now he has been transferred and he is already disappointed, and he's like, and that is also the moment where the wife comes in his support, and there is a transformation. But along with that, there are villagers and who are carrying arms. But you will see there is one statement by Mahesh Chaudhary, is sitting in the truck somewhere. He says that, I will run over you. So he is the one who starts this violence, that I will run over you. So now what to do? Now the state, the person who represented the state, the ranger, is no longer there to protect the environment. Now these are the villagers who have to resist, and that's the only way they can do it, because the Mahesh Chaudhary is initiating that. He's saying that, he's threatening them. Anyway, so it goes without saying that there is a man-nature relationship which has been explored in the film. But what I find more fascinating is that the way each character's relation with the nature is explored, starting from the protagonist till the minor characters. So you can see, for example, in the beginning, as you already mentioned in your presentation, that these two, the headman and the old man is collecting some herbal medicine. The headman is collecting some vegetables which are only found in the deep forest, as he says. Immediately after that, there is a lady who is worshipping a tree. Then we find these two young men who are stealing firewood, and they petty thieves in comparison with the big smuggler which we have in the film.
Right.
Then we have the head clerk. The head clerk, he's also the one who is asking for unpaid labor. I think I don't understand Assamese, but I heard the word begar somewhere. So which is also Hindi, so I can.
5 days, they have to give 5 days voluntary service.
Yeah, so that he uses the word begar.
Yes, certainly.
So, yeah, so that he's also enjoying that. That's also a form of corruption. He's enjoying that unpaid labor. Then he's getting free eggs and chicken and all that. Then Mahesh Chaudhary represents a capitalist agent. That if you combine these two things, first of all, that he is stopping this worker from forming a labor union, and then he has connection with the police, with the station master. He is bribing the station master. He is bribing the police. He is also financing the election. So he's controlling a lot in this kind of democracy which we have. Like I remember having read this article written by P. Sainath, vote for your favorite billionaire. So when you are voting in democracy, the kind of democracy which we have, that how only billionaires, they are there because the kind of money you have to spend in the election or getting the ticket or anything, the whole process requires the involvement of a lot of money. And then, so this, like here, Mahesh Chaudhary is, that he is the one who is controlling everything. So, and the politicians are there, like this MLA is there. He can even scold the MLA at several points. So it's like, the MLA is working as a political manager. So why should he get involved directly into the ruling business?
Because he doesn't want to antagonize the villagers.
Yeah.
Because the election time is nearing. So
yes.
So
he cannot antagonize Mahesh Chaudhary. Then there is one beautiful, small scene, the love between these two tribals, where Gauri is asked by her lover. It's not Gauri, maybe some other woman is there who is being asked that how much do you love me? And she says that she says that I love you more than the trees and all the birds and all the animals in the forest. So that's a beautiful expression of love by someone who is so much attached with nature. And then of course Gauri is there, who loves to roam around, and she knows it's not only that she expresses her love for nature, but there is also knowledge that she knows each bird, each tree. While in conversation with the Ruby, the wife of the ranger, we can find that, and that is the reason why Ruby, because she doesn't know much also, that initially she is alienated. So she feels that, it is repetitive, boring, monotonous. But later on, when she gets involved with nature, just maybe inspired by Gauri, that she starts forming this bond with nature. And then she doesn't feel that kind of alienation. She rather becomes more active in protecting the environment and supporting her husband towards the end of the film. Then this ranger, he also, because he gives several scientific explanations for the deforestation, for the arid land and different natural catastrophe because of the deforestation. So he has given one example of Ethiopia. Interestingly, like till the end of 19th century, Ethiopia had 30% of the forest. The forest is also 30%. And now it is reduced to 4%. So there is a drastic, this transformation from maybe around 150 years. You can see that there is so much of change has taken place. So basically, in a certain way, in an indirect way, in an tangential way, that there is also discussion about the nature of democracy, which we see, the way how Mahesh Chaudhary interacts with the police, with the station master, with the politicians, and he also suppresses the labor union. So it's like for Mahesh Chaudhary, or for who represents the capitalism, that it is like he's interested in commodification of nature. Nature is just a commodity for him. It's not like the way tribals look at nature, the way Gauri looks at nature, or the Ramu, the headman, or any other character in the film, they look at nature. So different characters are looking at nature differently according to their position in the society. And I also like, because when this ranger mentions the case of Ethiopia and several other things, that is also like when we talk about history, that nature or environment is also a part which I think people lately realized, maybe around 30, 50 years back, people realized that you cannot write history of man without talking about you nature. Can see several books coming. I can just think of one example when Sumit Sarkar wrote Modern India, and then he wrote another edition, almost the same thing. Then 1/3 of the book was assigned to just the environment. So economy, politics, and other things. And then 1/3 was environment. So finally, we can see through the film that it explores several aspects of man-nature relationship. So that way, I thank you for suggesting us to see this film. I had not seen this film, and I had seen the other one which you mentioned, Catastrophe. Maybe I think it is translated into English. Yeah, but that was also interesting.
Right.
Yeah.
Even there's another film by Janubur, It's a Long Way to the Sea, Hagarole Bohudur. There you will find, by the way, Mahesh Chaudhary, here he has played the role of the antagonist, but otherwise he is mostly the protagonist in Janu Barua's films. So you should watch the other. It's also available on YouTube, Hagarole Bohudur. It's a Long Way to the Sea. It's about a boatman's relationship with the river. And this Vishnu Khadghoria, who plays the role of Mahesh Chaudhary, he's the boatman there. So it's available on YouTube. If you just type in Janu Barua movies, maybe you can watch that as well. Now, yes, and I'll just quickly respond to some of your points. Yes, towards the end, the collective action could also be defined from this perspective that yes, now they do not have Tapan Barua as their savior because he's under suspension. So they do not have that messiah. They do not have that reference point which can guide them. So they have to fend for themselves. They have to defend themselves. Right. So obviously, yes. So they seize the opportunity. Now we have to look after ourselves. So we will do whatever is required to assert our, what belongs to us to stay with us. So yes, from that perspective, yes, that particular point was really crucial, and I think that's how they dealt with it. And yes, the rest of the things, obviously, I agree with all of them because they are, directly, in consonance with what I also talked about in the course of the movie, the relationship between the two prominent female figures, Ruby and Gauri, and how, and also how each characters, they had their own epistemology, they had their own understanding of the forest. Even Mahesh Chaudhary had his own understanding of the forest, albeit for a different motive. But his perspective was primarily quantifying nature. If we look at nature from quantitative aspects and qualitative aspects, so he keeps on asking his subordinates that how many numbers of these trees there, how many numbers of these trees, we need to cut down these many trees. So the very statistical approach towards nature. Yes, so that's how he commodifies nature. That's how he sees nature from a very consumerist perspective. So, but he is doing that. But here, what we need to understand that he is doing that in response to the global forces at play. So, just like what happens within Malguri or what happens within Kantapura is something a microcosmic representation of what is happening in the larger, like in the country or like in the global platform. What is happening in Bongaon or what is happening in Torajuli is reflective of what is happening around that time across the whole world. So all of these knowledge systems, if we take these characters and with their own understandings of nature, they have their respective, how should I put it? They have their respective correlatives, possibly in the larger world. So maybe that gives us an opportunity to expand the dimensions of this particular movie. Though it could be focused on a particular geography, but yes, it reflects too. It has its own attention directive towards other issues, which are far more maybe equally serious or equally demanding attention. So yes, absolutely. Thank you for your observations.
Thank you, Sanjay, and thank you, Dhurjjati. Any other questions, comments?
I mean, for me, this is a good learning experience. So thank you. Yeah, Tarkeshwar sir.
Yes, please go ahead.
Yeah, thank you for the film. It is a well-made film in the sense that well-woven film. There are different strands. They're well woven together. So that was well evident in the way everyone responded to the film too in the discussion. And it was also an interesting discussion. That's why I was listening to it rather than intervening in it. But what I thought was the discussion went in three directions in terms of understanding the this filmic text. One was trying to place it in the context of 19th century, the rise of tea garden, coming in of Christianity, and what Dhurjjati called as a change in epistemology of certain communities in 19th century. In that kind of context, you place it and you try to understand what is happening in the narrative now in this film. And then the other context was using the present 21st century discourse of Anthropocene and concerns regarding environment and reading the film in that context, from the context of the viewer today. But I thought we should also place the film in the context of 80s when it was made, in the sense that that was the time, I think, a kind of a discourse on environment, not so much about Anthropocene and other things, that was getting formed in India. Madhav Gadgil and others were started working, and then Vandana Shiva, all these people came prominently during that period. So in that sense, we need to place it in the context of 80s and see what kind of discourse regarding environment, forest was getting shaped. I think the film is also informed through this discourse of the 80s.
Right. Yes.
Where we talk about saving the forest, saving the environment, and try to put that responsibility on certain communities. Yes, we are corrupt. We can't do anything. Only these communities could save it. So it is the tribal communities who have to take up the task of saving the forest. That was the kind of discourse that was emanating in the 80s. But interestingly, it is not the tribals who were formulating this discourse. Though in the narrative, it appears as if they have taken up the mandate of protecting the forest at the end, but it is a discourse that gets formulated by others in the 80s. So in that sense, this film is also part of participating in that kind of discourse, I would say. That is one way of looking at it. I'm not saying that we should not do it in terms of placing it in the context of the 19th century onwards, what happened, or looking at it from the vantage point of the discourses that are
very contemporary,
yeah,
sort of very immediate,
I'm not
immediately
discounting any of
contemporary
these two when I'm trying to
discourses.
say that we should also do this. Another point I wanted to, it's a minor one. Yes, there was a shift in the epistemological framework of the communities in the 19th century. Now, it is not only about the tribal communities or Adivasi communities, but even others, I would say. Even the categories of Northeast, Assam, they were also getting constituted through certain discourses that emerged in the
Yes, the
19th
elite,
century,
the
and
formation
also
of the elite
the
and all.
natives also actively participated it in the early 20th century in Assam.
Yes.
So in that sense, it is not only the entry of Christianity and tea garden and other things, not only change the epistemology of the tribals, but also quote unquote non-tribals. So in that sense,
Yes, yes.
that is interesting to look at it from that perspective. It's only a minor thing that I just wanted to.
So that's a major point, because the early 20s were also the times when there were frequent drives for resettling, people from East Bengal, then East Bengal into Assam. So this was a huge, influx of people who came from then East Bengal into Assam, and they were settled at different places across the state. So this is not a minor issue, but it's the resettlement of population was a major issue, political as well as an electoral issue during the 1930s. And also it had its impact on 1947 events as well. So certainly, I mean, this is a major issue in terms of, these demographic changes which were taking place in the early decades of the 20th century. Yes, certainly, sir, absolutely. And
even the categories tribal and Adivasi were also constituted during this time.
Yes, certainly. And how they start, and along with that, there were issues of language, mother tongue, medium of instruction. Such other factors also came in due course of time. So as I said, I mean, these issues were very well entrenched and very problematic issues which had. So even if you take one issue, I mean, this should actually require, a full paper possibly. Even if you take one fragment of the discussion. So yes, absolutely, sir. And also there was the borderland issues were also there. The issue of the borderland, So those issues were also highly prominent.
Thank you for the film and also your discussion, which raised a lot of issues. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Thank you. Sir.
Thank you, Tarkeshwar. Any more comments? Okay. I think we will bring this session to a close. It's been a wonderful session. The fact that it has gone on after 10:30, Nikhila and I see that as some kind of a marker of the, success of a discussion. So thank you very much, Dhurjjati, for agreeing to do this for us. And thank you all for logging in and participating. Good night and have a nice Sunday.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you.
Thank you. Good night.
Good night.
Thank
See you
you.
next week.
Good night.
Thank you.
Bye.
Good night.
Yeah.